Note from Random Audiobook, this release is actually 3 novels, one right after another. Sunrise, Zenith, and Day's End. Additionally, parts of this might sound rougher than usual, as there were over 3,000 new words or misspellings that I would have had to listen to and fix the pronunciation of, which is many times more than I usually need to do. Consequently, I only listened to the ones that occurred 5 times or more, and fixed those. Now, on to the novels. Sunrise. By Blackcross and Taylor. Category, Baldur's Gate. Genre, adventure/romance. Words, 114,136. Rating, T. Status, complete. Summary, from the sheltered peace of Candlekeep to the city of Baldur's Gate, one girl's journey along the Sword Coast. Completed. Chapter 1, Autumn 1366. Sunrise. Autumn 1366. Frithha sat on the roof of one of Candlekeep's many towers and watched the sun slowly sinking over the sea. The whole world seemed laid out before her. On her left, the great ocean of the Sword Coast, calm and shimmering like an endless expanse of blue glass. To her right, the plains of the western heartlands stretched off into the distance, a patchwork of fields, grasslands, and forests. It was times like this she hardly felt her 19 years, as though some great knowledge, as old as the mountains, flowed within her just out of reach. It was late Elint and the surrounding forests were already dressed in their warm golds and browns. She smiled, watching the trees sway gently, whispering in an ancient language of their own. She had always loved autumn. Imoen joked it was because the autumnal colors provided her with a natural camouflage. Frithha grinned at the memory of it and, brushing a few strands of pale copper hair from her face, she lay back down on the warm tiles and continued to sun herself. "Frithha? Frithha!" The sound of someone calling her started Frithha from her dozing. She stretched lazily and gave a contented yawn before shifting down to the edge of the roof and peering over to confirm her suspicions. A girl with pretty green eyes and hair the color of rose hips, smiled up at her from one of the tower's higher windows. "Hey, Imoen!" Frithha reached her hand down to help her friend and soon they were both comfortably atop the roof, Frithha lying back down to continue her sunbathing. Imoen laughed at the sight of her friend laid there. Barefoot, her breeches and sleeves rolled up as high as they would go, shirt parted to expose her pale stomach and hair loose, Frithha was a picture of contentment. "I don't know why you bother with that," Imoen said, smiling, "it's not as though you ever tan." "The sun feels nice on my skin," Frithha replied lazily, not even opening her eyes. "Don't you get bored? How long have you been up here?" Since just after lunch." "Since noon?" Imoen cried incredulously, "I've been doing chores for Puffguts all day." Frithha snorted at Imoen's nickname for the corpulent old innkeeper, turning onto her side to watch her friend rant. "How do you finish yours so quickly?" "I didn't," replied Frithha, amused by her friend's reaction. "But didn't Gorion say you had to clean out the archives in one of the basements? He's wanted it done since first day." Frithha remained unconcerned. Her foster father was always providing her with chores to do. If she had finished this one, he'd just have found something else to occupy her. "So? It's a waste of all this sunshine, I can do it tonight. Besides, what's the rush? No one's been in those archives for years," she answered, giving her friend a grin before lying back down. "Yeah, well, I thought Puffguts Winthrop was going to keep me at the inn forever," Imoen continued, tying back her short hair in an effort to keep it out of her face on the blustery rooftop. "He even made me late for Steen's errands." Frithia smiled, wondering if anyone in Candlekeep still believed that Imoen was just running errands for one of its most infamous residents. A notorious thief and guild master in his day, Steen Quickhand had obviously believed in the saying, "You never meet an old thief," and retired gracefully to the seclusion of Candlekeep. However, he seemed to have taken a shine to Imoen, and since last year they had been meeting, and if Imoen's acquisitions from the inn were anything to go by, he was a very good teacher. "You given any more thought to your training?" Imoen continued, obviously trying to keep the emphasis off your training, thought Frithia with a scowl. At the beginning of the month, Gorion had told her, since she was now of age, she would soon have to decide what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. "Ugh, training," Frithia grumbled, utterly unenthused with the idea. "What was it Gorion said? I have to decide what field I want to study in to become a useful member of society," they chorused, Imoen giggling. Frithia sighed. The deadline was drawing closer, and she was struck with a pang of jealousy at how unrestricted Imoen's life was allowed to be. No lessons for her. Well, not officially anyway. "Are you still undecided?" Imoen questioned, bringing Frithia's mind back to the present. "I'd probably find it difficult too, if I could be anything I wanted," she teased, playfully poking her friend in the ribs. It was true. Frithia was nimble and strong with a keen mind. She had her pick of careers. "Yeah, I suppose. Anything but a cleric, that is," Frithia replied with a laugh that Imoen shared. It was a well-reported fact that Frithia had very little respect for anyone in authority, and that extended to gods as well. "Well, I doubt I could even if I wanted to," Frithia continued, smirking. "I can't understand it, but I sometimes get the impression that Father Welland doesn't like me." An understatement that brought yet more laughter from the girls. It had been a hot summer's day, more than 10 years ago, when the Order of the Radiant Heart had arrived in Candlekeep. Imoen had spent the morning spying on the knights gathered in the gardens outside the main keep, as she helped Winthrop serve drinks, and had reported back to Frithia that afternoon. Apparently they had brought an evil book to be stored there. Frithia had wondered how a book could be evil, and if so, why not just destroy it? Their chores completed, the girls decided to sit outside and see if they could learn anything more. No one paid any heed to the two children as they sat on the lawns, watching the knights tend to their kit, laughing and drinking. One of the older knights was moving round the few wounded. He came to a knight with a bandaged arm who was settled nearer the girls and began to perform a ritual on him. "What's he doing?" asked Imoen. "He's a cleric of Helm," replied Frithia, recognizing the eye-shaped symbol being held over the knight. "He must be healing him." "Can you imagine being a priest of Helm?" Imoen giggled. "It must be so boring. Blah blah duty, blah blah honor." Frithia started to giggle too and, unaware of the approaching danger, joined in. Her voice deep and serious, her face and hands turned skywards, she began. "O Helm, mighty god of boredom, let your all-seeing eye help me seek out and prevent the fun of others." Laughter held the girls, neither noticing the tall figure of Father Welland, Candlekeep's resident Helmite, looming behind them. "Be a goody-goody follower of Helm," she continued with enthusiasm. "I'd rather be sacrificed to Lolth the Spider Queen." Giggling erupted again, but it didn't last long. "You!" Both girls jumped, whirling round to find Welland glowering down at them, enraged. "Blasphemous child! Heathen!" he shrieked. "Gorion shall know of this outrage!" And before Frithia had chance to react, She had been dragged to her feet and was being marched towards the keep by the furious priest, leaving Imoen behind on the grass, bent double with laughter. Frithla smiled at the memory of it. Gorion hadn't been that bothered, and as for Wellen, well, that day had been the start of a relationship that provided her with many opportunities for tormenting, and him, just as many for ranting, so she concluded he was as happy they had met as she was.
"So you've still no ideas yet?"
Imoen questioned again, and Frithla suspected her stalling was wearing thin.
"Ah, no, not really,"
she answered, avoiding her friend's eyes. In truth, Frithla had decided long ago what she wanted to do with the rest of her life and was pretty sure that Gorion would not approve. She wanted to become a bard. Not that she had any inclination towards singing or acting. In fact, she had never even met a bard. However, she had done a little research on the subject and using this knowledge drawn some logical conclusions on what it would entail. Bards traveled. Bards performed songs or plays. Bards performed for people, and, since most towns didn't have a theatre, this would take place in pubs and inns. Ergo, being a bard would involve a lot of hanging around in bars, picking the occasional pocket to cover the bar tab. A cheap way to see the world and an excellent way to live your life. Imoen sighed.
"Well, I don't know why."
A familiar shout cut Imoen off.
"Frithla! Frithla!" "Uh-oh. Oh, sounds like someone's going to catch it now,"
Imoen announced gleefully, as she watched Frithla scramble to the edge of the rooftop, trying to simultaneously tuck her shirt in and pull her boots on. After a few moments of frantic struggling, she finally sorted herself out, pinning her hair back and, with practiced ease, dropped off the roof.
"See you."
Gorion's office was just as it has always been. Lighter and more airy than the other rooms in Candlekeep, Frithla had always suspected that Gorion, once an adventurer, gave up his life in the outdoors for one of seclusion and tomes with rather more reluctance than the other sages. The wall opposite the door housed 2 large windows, and was the only one not lined in books, but Frithla had been in the room many times before and couldn't pretend to be fascinated by the view for too long before Gorion realized she was just trying to avoid his eye.
"Frithla!"
Frithla turned round, and, still keeping her head bowed, slumped into the chair in front of Gorion's desk to await her lecture.
"How many times are we to have this conversation before you actually take any notice?"
Frithla said nothing. There was no reply to make, but this only seemed to incense him further. His eyes were dark beneath his woolly eyebrows, his lined face pale with anger.
"I've wanted those archives cleaned since the last 10 days, and if you had done them when you were supposed to, then the delegation from the Order of the Black Key would have the maps they need. The first reader would not be livid at the prospect of Candlekeep's reputation being tainted, and I would not be the laughingstock of the entire library for not being able to control my own ward."
Frithla opened her mouth to defend herself, but Gorion seemed to be in full swing now.
"You used to be able to get away with such reckless behavior when you were younger, but as the years have passed I see no change in your attitude. You are not a child anymore. You must act more responsibly, but if anything you seem to be regressing. You have still to make a decision. Concentrate or—"
A sharp rap at the door cut Gorion off mid-flow, and a moment later a robed man glanced round tentatively.
Are you busy, Gorion?"
Gorion seemed torn for a moment, unwilling to calm down so soon, but finally gave a long sigh, sinking into his chair as he did so, as though physically deflating as his anger left him.
No, do come in. Frithla, please give us a moment."
Frithha rose from her chair and wandered over to the furthest window. She leant her face against the cool glass, staring out at the sky, a blaze of orange and pink as the sun set. She never meant to anger Gorion. If she had known why he had wanted the archives cleared, instead of thinking it was just another random task that was designed to keep her out of trouble, she would have done it straight away, but Gorion never seemed to tell her anything. He expected her to be more responsible, but how could she when no one trusted her? He wouldn't even tell her about her parents. When she had been younger she could do no wrong. She had liked her studies, would help out in the temples, fetch and carry for the sages. But now, she still loved Gorion, but they seemed to have grown apart. He just didn't understand who she was anymore. A polite cough jerked her from her thoughts. The other monk had left and Gorion was stood behind his desk, watching her with a mixture of weariness and, strangely, sorrow. Frithha shrugged inwardly. She may as well tell him now and get it all over and done with.
I want to be a bard.
She winced, waiting for the tirade to begin, but nothing came. She risked a glance at Gorion, checking that he wasn't so angry that words had finally failed him, but he was stood, looking as calm as ever and, was that amused? Gorion sank slowly back into his chair.
A bard.
Frithha nodded nervously, her mind racing. She had been through quite a few possible scenarios for telling Gorion about her plans, but none of them had involved calm Gorion, and Frithha found herself at a complete loss.
A bard,
confirmed Gorion with a smile.
May I inquire as to why?
Right, this was the part where she had to really sell it.
Well, because they play music. I never knew you were interested in music. Really?
She answered, trying to sound surprised.
Indeed. Any other reasons?
Gorion continued, his beard twitching.
Well, I'd like to study magic.
Here she glanced at Gorion, who confirmed this with a nod.
And I've always been interested in the lore of Faerun and their stuff.
Gorion smiled widely, and Frithha was put in mind of one of the cats when it had cornered a particularly fat mouse.
Well, that all seems fine. It does. Yes. Barding is an honorable profession and one that I believe will utilize your many, talents. Meet me here tomorrow morning and we can discuss it further.
Frithha sat before Gorion's desk, dismay rising within her as Gorion read from his parchment. This was not happening.
You'll have weapons training with Hull and the other guards every morning, with your afternoon studies being divided between the arts of magic with Archmage Jesseth, and general reading in the library. Once every 10 days.
Here he paused to make note of something on the parchment.
Probably 3rd days, you will join Mon in chores for Masterstein.
Gorion returned the parchment to the desk, taking a moment to observe Frithha's look of unreserved despair before continuing, trying all the while to hide his amusement.
Now, I've made some inquiries and the only person here with any musical inclination is Beth. The cook.
Frithha cried incredulously, finally finding her voice.
Yes. She says she will supervise your efforts in singing, though she has no experience in the actual playing of music, so you will have to study your chosen instrument without help, though I believe there are some volumes in the archives you may find useful.
Gorion smiled.
Perhaps you can dig them out while you're cleaning up down there,
he suggested, a hint of reproach creeping into his voice. Gorion made a final cursory glance over the parchment and nodded to himself.
I believe that's everything.
Frithha felt physically shaken. She couldn't have been more horrified by the way things had turned out than if, halfway through the meeting, Welland had turned up and convinced Gorion to send her to Helm's boot camp for little heathens in the icy wastes of Vasa.
"There's so much work,"
she cried with disbelief, hoping that she would awake any second to find it had all been some terrible dream.
"Yes, indeed,"
Gorion agreed, nodding enthusiastically,
"but don't worry, I think we will manage to fit it all in."
He rose slowly, both him and the chair creaking slightly as he did so before crossing the room to open the door for her.
"But I thought that bards just sort of learned things as they went along, with, minimum training,"
Frithha continued, ignoring Gorion's subtle indication that she was to leave and clinging desperately to the chance that this still could be some horrible mistake.
"Goodness, child,"
Gorion chuckled whilst ushering her through the door,
"whatever gave you that impression? Now, off you go and finish your errands."
Frithha whirled round but had no chance to reply before the door was shut smartly in her face. She stood a moment, glaring at the dark wood before slinking dejectedly off down the corridor. Frithha was stood on a stool to reach the higher shelves, sorting through the old tomes and rolls of parchment that had found their way down into the archives over the years. On the floor, piles were growing, old volumes that needed rebinding, books and scrolls for shelving and a pile of miscellaneous items, so worn with age that Frithha could no longer tell where they belonged. Every now and then, she would take down a tome only to have to duck, covering her head with her arms as half a dozen or so books and scrolls were dislodged and cascaded over her. Or grab a book only to have all the pages drop smartly out the cover, and if anyone had stumbled onto the scene they would not have been blamed for thinking that Frithha was trying to demolish the place rather than actually cleaning the archives.
"Bloody Gorion!"
Frithha coughed, as she pulled down one of the older scrolls only for it to unroll and engulf her in a cloud of dust.
"This is his way of punishing me. Lessons every day and some of them with sodding Jesseth. He hates me."
Frithha threw the scroll onto the pile by the door before turning back to clear the rest of the shelf, punctuating each word by savagely hurling a book to the floor.
"Stupid, bloody, barding. Why'd you choose it then?"
Frithha jumped so high she almost toppled off her stool.
"By Lolth, Imoen,"
she gasped, clutching her chest and glowering at her friend,
"how long have you been there?"
Imoen smiled.
"Long enough to know that the rumors going round the library are true and that the sages aren't the only ones not happy about the fact you're going to become a bard. So why did you choose it? You never mentioned anything about this before."
Frithha sighed, stepping down from her stool and sinking onto it while Imoen mirrored her movements, perching on a pile of books opposite her.
"Because I thought it would be a complete skive and lead to a career in wassailing. My life was going to be one long pub crawl around Faerun, that's why."
Frithha shook her head and suddenly there were tears in her eyes.
"And now everything's gone horribly wrong and I don't know what to do,"
she finished with a wail before dissolving into indelicate sobs.
"Oh, Frithha,"
Imoen said with a sympathetic smile, putting a comforting arm round her friend,
"don't worry, I know it seems like a lot to take on but I'm sure Gorion wouldn't make you do anything that made you completely miserable."
Frithha's only reply to this seemed to be an incredulous snort, but she could have been mistaken, it was hard to tell through all the sobbing.
"There now, and even though you've got lots of work planned, there's no reason you can't waste all that training lazing around in taverns once you leave."
This seemed to bring Frithha round slightly.
"You're right,"
she finally answered, blinking away her tears and wiping her nose on her sleeve.
"Some things are worth working for. Hey,"
she continued, suddenly brightening,
let's go and try to break into Winthrop's cellar again. Okay, but what about all this?
Imoen said, gesturing to the bibliographic carnage all around them.
I'll finish it tomorrow.
End of chapter.